Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, Securing the City by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Sergeant Hansen was behind the wheel of a sedan, with Private Parker in the passenger seat. Both of them had the windows down and the sunroof open, their arms hanging out the sides, enjoying the breeze as it rolled through the car. The air was warm and dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and asphalt, and for a few precious minutes, it almost felt like the world hadn't fallen apart. Hansen kept the speed moderate, no more than 30 miles an hour, while the streets in this area were clear of zombies. Wrecked cars and the debris left behind from those collisions still littered the road. He weaved around a crumpled sedan that had been pushed halfway onto the sidewalk, its front end buried in a fire hydrant that had long since stopped flowing. A few yards further, a pickup truck sat with its driver's side door hanging open, bloody handprints smeared on either side of the windows. Glass from shattered headlights and taillights glittered on the pavement, catching the sun in small flashes as they rolled past. Parker had his arm resting on the door, his hand open to catch the wind, fingers spreading and closing as the air pushed through them. It was the kind of simple, mindless thing that belonged to a different time, and he was enjoying every second of it. "I can't remember the last time we've been able to just cruise around Sarge," Parker said. "I think it was a week before all this," Hansen said. Parker thought about it for a moment, nodding along as the memory struck him. "The supply run," Parker said. Hansen nodded, a smile coming across his face. "If I had known the world was ending a week later, I would have sprung for better booze," Hansen said. Parker let out a laugh as he responded. "Sarge, I've seen your paycheck. You had to take out a loan for the cheap stuff," Parker said. Both of them laughed as Hansen made the turn into a neighborhood that was at the northern edge of the city. The houses here were spread further apart than in the denser sections of town. Single-story homes with wide lots and open yards. Most of them sat quiet and undisturbed, their occupants either long gone or locked inside. A few had front doors that had been left open, dark interiors visible from the road. Lawns had gone to seed, the grass turning brown and brittle, the sprinkler systems that once kept them green having given up along with everything else. Hansen drove all the way up to the final road, pulling over and parking in front of a house. The sedan rocked gently as he cut the engine, and both men climbed out, stretching muscles that had gotten stiff from the ride. Their boots hit the pavement and they stood by the car for a moment, looking across the street, seeing nothing but desert stretching out as far as they could see. The open expanse was a welcome sight, miles of flat sun-baked earth with nothing moving across it. No shambling figures, no dark clusters on the horizon, just empty ground all the way to the distant mountains. The wind pushed across it without resistance, carrying nothing but heat and silence. "It's good to see that none of those things have wandered back to the city," Parker said. The two of them walked out to the last street, looking to the right, spotting a couple dozen people working on a makeshift barricade constructed out of cars. The vehicles were lined up bumper to bumper along the road, creating a wall of metal that stretched several blocks in length. People moved between them, pushing, pulling, adjusting positions, their voices carrying across the distance in short bursts of effort and instruction. Some of them were using crowbars to pry hoods and trunks open, removing weight from the vehicles to make them easier to push. Others were on their knees, checking the alignment of the cars, making sure there were no gaps wide enough for a body to squeeze through. "Yeah, but I'll sleep better once we get this thing constructed," Hansen said. Hansen smacked Parker on the arm, motioning for him to follow as the duo walked toward the line. The barricade was rough but functional, the cars sitting at various angles where they had been pushed into place. Some were newer models, others older, the selection drawn from whatever had been available in the surrounding blocks. They watched as a group of 4 civilians pushed a car out from the next block, the vehicle rolling slowly on flat ground as they strained behind it. 2 men had their shoulders against the trunk, while the other 2 pushed from the sides, their feet digging into the pavement for traction. The group made the turn and positioned the car right in front of the edge of the line. They strained to push it back into the bumper of the other one, a slight sound reaching the soldiers' ears as the bumpers clanged together. As the 2 soldiers approached, a fit woman took notice of them, walking up to meet them. She had her brown hair pulled back into a ponytail, her shirt soaked in sweat from the labor. Despite the appearance, her tone was upbeat. "Well, it's about time you soldier boys started lending a hand," Jade said, Hansen let out a laugh as he extended his hand for a shake. "You must be Jade," Hansen said. "What makes you say that?" Jade asked. "Well, Captain Foster said I was to report to a young lady who looked like she could bend Private Parker over her knee, and you certainly fit the bill," Hansen said. Jade shot a glance over to Parker, pointing her finger at him and speaking forcefully. "Don't you go getting ideas in your head, Private," Jade said. "I wouldn't dream of it," Parker said. He trailed off, contemplating for a moment before smirking and continuing. "Of course, now that I think about it, I just might dream about it," Parker said. Jade reached into her pocket, pulling out a butterfly knife. She spun it around for a few moments in a menacing display, the blade flipping and catching between her fingers with a fluidity that suggested she had done it 1,000 times before. She ended with the blade sticking straight up, catching the light. Parker held his breath, not knowing if he was about to be shanked or not. He breathed a sigh of relief when she moved over to the car, stabbing the tire. The air rushed out with a long hiss as the rubber flattened against the pavement. She pulled the blade free and folded it back into its handles with the same ease she had shown opening it, slipping it back into her pocket. "The cars will be more than enough to hold a handful of them at bay, but I figure if the tires are flat that they can hold out against more," Jade said. "Do you not have anybody working on the reinforcements yet?" Hansen asked. Jade shook her head, motioning down the street, prompting the soldiers to turn and look. There was a long, empty stretch going on until the end of the neighborhood. No cars blocking things, just open road with houses on one side and desert on the other. "I have a team that is going around collecting what we're going to need to reinforce the line," Jade said. "What are you having them get?" Hansen asked. "The reinforcements are going to be twofold. We have a few welders who are going to put rebar on the cars, then secure them to the ground. Once we get that complete, we're going to build on the outside of the line, using vinyl siding or something similar to build a wall," Jade said. "A vinyl siding wall? Is that really going to hold up?" Parker asked. Jade stared at Parker, putting him at unease, getting him to back down a bit. She let the silence do the work for a moment before responding. "We're not defending ourselves against an invading army, at least not in the traditional sense. They're not going to be using ladders or tools to break through. We just have to make sure they don't have an opening to push through. If you have a better idea of what we're going to have in abundance in the city limits, then I'm all ears," Jade said. She gestured broadly at the houses lining the street behind them, each one a potential source of building materials. The logic was hard to argue with. Every house in the neighborhood had siding on it, and nobody was going to object to it being repurposed. Hansen looked over to Parker. "Will Parker do you?" Hansen asked. Parker hemmed and hawed for a moment before letting out a defeated sigh. "No, I don't suppose I do," Parker said. "Well, since we've now established that you're not the brains of the operation, I have to hope you have the brawn," Jade said. She reached out to Parker, grabbing onto his bicep, giving it a squeeze, shaking her head at the result. "Well, so much for that," Jade said. Parker yanked his arm free, puffing his chest out in a playful manner. "I'll have you know that I've struck down more than my fair share of zombies over the last couple of months," Parker said. Jade looked around in an exaggerated manner, scanning the empty streets and the quiet desert beyond the barricade before shrugging. "Well, I don't see any zombies around at the moment, so that particular skill isn't needed at this particular time. What I do need, however, is someone who can push cars onto the line. Do you think you can handle that, tough guy?" Jade asked. Parker began to speak up, but before he could, Hansen's radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was elevated, agitated in a way that cut through the easy atmosphere they had been enjoying. Sergeant Hansen, do you copy?" Sullivan asked. "Saved by the bell, Parker," Hansen said. Hansen grabbed his radio, clicking it on. "I got you, Sullivan. What's up?" Hansen asked. "Sarge, we got a situation over here and I can't reach Foster. Are you close to Interstate 11? Sullivan asked. Hansen glanced over to Jade, who nodded. "It's a few miles west of here," Jade said. Hansen nodded before going back to the radio. "Yeah, we can be there in a few minutes. What's going on?" Hansen asked. "Just get over here now. We have visitors." Chapter 2. Hansen pushed the sedan hard as they headed west, the engine straining as the speedometer crept past 60. The road out here was clearer than most, the residential blocks giving way to 4-lane roads that had already been cleared. Parker sat with his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon through the windshield. Neither of them had said a word since leaving the barricade. Sullivan's voice was still sitting in both their heads, the urgency of it hanging in the air between them. It didn't take long before the elevated stretch of Interstate 11 came into view ahead, the overpass rising above the flat terrain. Hansen spotted the vehicles first, a cluster of cars and trucks parked along the shoulder of the on-ramp, arranged in no particular order. He counted 7 of them as he pulled the sedan off the road and onto the dirt shoulder, the tires crunching over gravel as he brought them to a stop. Sullivan was standing near the front of the group, his rifle slung over his shoulder. The corporal looked relieved to see them, his posture loosening as Hansen and Parker climbed out of the sedan. A woman was standing beside Sullivan, her arms folded across her chest as she spoke with him. She turned as the 2 soldiers approached, her eyes sharp and assessing. She was somewhere in her 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that had been hastily tied back. Her clothes were dusty and road-worn, the kind of look that came from days of hard travel without stopping. Despite the exhaustion showing on her face, she carried herself with the composure of someone who was holding a group together through willpower alone. "Sarge, this is Janet. She's the one in charge of this group," Sullivan said. Janet extended her hand, and Hansen shook it. "Sergeant Hansen," Hansen said. "Thank God you people are here," Janet said. Her voice was steady, but there was a strain underneath it that was hard to miss. Hansen looked past her at the group gathered around the vehicles. Most of them were young, a lot of women and teenagers, with only a handful of older men scattered among them. The group looked beaten down, their faces carrying the hollowed-out look of people who had been running for a while. Some of them sat on the ground with their backs against the cars, too tired to stand. Others paced near the edge of the group, restless and watchful, their eyes scanning the road they had come from, as if expecting something to follow them. "Where did you come from?" Hansen asked. "Prim," Janet said. "That's a haul. What happened down there?" Hansen asked. Janet's jaw tightened before she spoke. "About a week ago, a group showed up on the edge of town. We thought they were survivors looking for shelter, so we let them in. Turned out they were anything but. They waited until everyone was settled in for the night, then they took over. Armed to the teeth, organized, and mean as hell," Janet said. "Raiders," Parker said. Janet nodded. "Our men tried to fight back, but they didn't stand a chance. Most of them were killed in the first few hours. The ones who survived long enough to get out are the ones standing behind me," Janet said. She gestured toward the group, and Hansen took another look. The picture made more sense now. These weren't just tired survivors. These were people who had watched their community get torn apart and had barely gotten out alive. "How many of you are there?" Hansen asked. 32 in this group, but we lost some on the way here," Janet said. She paused, the weight of that statement passing across her face before she pushed through it. "The interstate was crawling with those things. We didn't have a choice but to push right through them. Most of us made it, but one of our cars got stuck in the middle of it. We tried to go back for them, but there were just too many," Janet said. "How many people are in the car?" Parker asked. 5, 2 adults and 3 kids, Janet said. "How far back?" Hansen asked. "A few miles south on the interstate, maybe 3 or 4, Janet said. Hansen looked at Parker, and the private was already moving. He walked over to one of the caravan vehicles, a large SUV with dents and scrapes along the sides where it had pushed through the horde. The front bumper was bent and smeared with dark fluid, the evidence of the run still fresh. Parker pulled the driver's side door open and looked at the keys sitting in the ignition. "We'll take this one and go have a look," Parker said. Hansen turned back to Janet. "How bad was it when you came through?" Hansen asked. "Bad? I don't know how many we pushed through. Hundreds, thousands, they just kept coming. The one we lost was the lead vehicle. They tried to clear a path for us, and they just..." Janet trailed off, the memory of what happened overwhelming her. Hansen let that settle for a moment before turning over to Sullivan. "Get these people into town and somewhere safe. Get them fed and settled," Hansen said. "You got it, Sarge," Sullivan said. Hansen turned back to Janet. "Sullivan will take care of you and your people. We're going to go see what we're dealing with and figure out how to get those 5 back," Hansen said. Janet reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Please don't leave them out there," Janet said. "We won't," Hansen said. She held his eyes for a moment longer, then let go. Hansen gave her a nod before turning and jogging over to the SUV, where Parker was already behind the wheel. The sergeant climbed into the passenger seat and pulled his door shut. Parker had the engine running, the vehicle idling smoothly despite the beating it had taken on the drive up. "You ready for this?" Parker asked. "Let's go see what we're dealing with," Hansen said. Parker pulled the SUV out onto the on-ramp and merged onto Interstate 11 heading south. The road was wide and open, 4 lanes stretching ahead with a concrete median dividing the directions. They drove in silence for the first mile, both of them watching the road ahead. The landscape on either side was flat desert, featureless and empty, offering no cover and no surprises. It was the kind of openness that should have been reassuring, but knowing what was out there ahead of them made it feel exposed instead. Parker spotted the first of them at the 2-mile mark, a scattering of creatures wandering across the lanes, maybe a dozen of them, shambling around, focused on nothing in particular. They took notice of the SUV as it blew past, their heads turning to track the movement, but they were too slow and too spread out to be a concern. Parker kept his speed up, and they were behind them in seconds. The numbers grew from there. By the time they had gone another half-mile, the road ahead was no longer empty. Clusters of ghouls dotted the lanes, groups of 10 and 20 stumbling along the highway. Some were pressed against a couple of wrecked cars on the side of the road, clawing at doors and windows. Others just stood in the road, swaying in place, drawn to nothing in particular. Parker weaved around them, keeping the speed up, the SUV rocking as he cut between lanes. A few of the creatures reached out toward the vehicle as it passed, their fingers scraping against the paint before they fell away behind them. "This is getting thick," Parker said. Hansen didn't respond. He was staring ahead through the windshield, his eyes locked on something in the distance. The road ahead was darkening, the asphalt disappearing under a mass of bodies that stretched from shoulder to shoulder. It started as a dense cluster and spread outward in every direction, the creatures packed so tightly together that individual shapes were hard to pick out. "There," Hansen said. He pointed toward the center of the mass. Parker slowed the SUV, bringing it to a crawl as the creatures on the outer edge began turning toward them. In the middle of the horde, maybe 100 yards ahead, sat a car. It was completely surrounded, the ghouls pressing against it from every angle, their hands flat against the windows and doors. The vehicle sat motionless, trapped in a sea of dead flesh with no way out. Parker brought the SUV to a stop, keeping enough distance between them and the leading edge of the horde. Both men stared at the scene for a long moment. "There's got to be a few hundred around the car alone," Parker said. "And look past them," Hansen said. Parker adjusted his view, looking beyond the cluster surrounding the vehicle. The interstate behind it was full. As far as he could see, creatures filled the road, thousands of them spread across the lanes and the median and the shoulders. They moved in slow, aimless patterns, a river of the dead flowing north along the highway. "Where the hell did they all come from?" Parker asked. "Who knows? Maybe one of the party bus groups heard something and they all just wandered back to the interstate," Hansen said. He sat with it for a moment, running through possibilities in his head. The sheer number of them made a direct approach impossible. Even with heavy firepower, they couldn't fight through that many and still get people out alive. "Can you see anybody moving in the car?" Parker asked. Hansen squinted, trying to get a better look through the distance and the press of bodies. After a moment, he spotted movement behind the glass. A hand pressed against the inside of the window, fingers splayed. "Yeah, somebody's alive in there," Hansen said. Parker let out a breath, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. "So, how do we get to them?" Parker asked. "We don't. Not like this," Hansen said. He looked at the horde one more time, fixing the image in his mind. The position of the car, the density of the creatures around it, the thousands more filling the road behind it. Then he began turning around. "We need to figure something out, and we need to do it fast," Hansen said. He put the SUV in reverse, backing up far enough to swing around without getting close to the creatures that were already shambling in their direction. A handful of them had closed to within 20 yards, their arms outstretched, their pace picking up as the engine noise drew them in. Hansen pointed the vehicle north and hit the gas, the SUV surging forward and putting distance between them and the horde. The creatures shrank in the mirrors, still shuffling forward, still reaching for something that was already gone. Hansen grabbed his radio as they drove, clicking it on. "Sullivan, you there?" Hansen asked. The radio crackled for a moment before Sullivan's voice came through. "I'm here, Sarge. What did you find?" Sullivan asked. "We've got thousands of those things on the interstate south of town, and 5 people trapped in a car right in the middle of them," Hansen said. Sullivan went quiet for a beat. "What do you need from me?" Sullivan asked. "Get on the phone and start making calls. I need anybody with ideas and the muscle to back them up. And see if you can reach Foster," Hansen said. "Copy that, Sarge," Sullivan said. Hansen clipped the radio back and stared out the windshield at the road ahead. The open highway stretched before them, leading back toward the city and whatever plan they could put together. 5 people were sitting in that car, surrounded on every side, and the clock was running. "We'll figure it out," Parker said. Hansen nodded, but didn't say anything. The image of that hand pressed against the glass was still sitting in front of his eyes, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. Chapter 3. Hansen and Parker pulled the SUV back onto the on-ramp and found the staging area busier than they had left it. Sullivan had moved most of Janet's caravan down the road toward town, but a few vehicles remained, their occupants milling about near the shoulder. Sullivan himself was standing near his truck with his phone pressed to his ear, talking fast and gesturing with his free hand, as if the person on the other end could see him. He spotted the SUV and waved them over, wrapping up the call as Hansen and Parker climbed out. "Any luck reaching Foster?" Hansen asked. "No, he's somewhere near the strip and his radio is out of range. But I got the next best thing," Sullivan said. He pointed down the road. A sedan was coming up from the direction of town, moving at a good clip, dust kicking up behind it as it left the pavement and pulled onto the shoulder. It came to a stop, and 2 large men climbed out, both of them still wearing their gladiator armor, stained and worn from weeks of use. Magnus walked over to them with the steady, purposeful stride that Hansen had come to recognize. Aldrich was a step behind, his hand resting casually on the hilt of the sword at his hip. Both of them looked like they had been pulled away from something, but neither seemed bothered by it. "Sullivan told us about your situation," Magnus said. "Did he give you the details?" Hansen asked. "Enough of them. 5 people trapped in a vehicle, surrounded by a horde on the interstate," Magnus said. "Hundreds around the car itself, and thousands more spread out behind them on the road heading south," Hansen said. Magnus took that in without any visible reaction. Aldrich let out a low whistle, running a hand across the back of his neck. "So, fighting our way in isn't an option," Aldrich said. "Not even close. We'd run out of ammo before we got within 50 yards of the car," Parker said. "Which means we need to move them," Hansen said. The group went quiet for a moment, everyone running through the same problem. Moving a horde that size required something loud and persistent, something that could grab their attention and lead them away while a rescue team moved in behind. They had done it dozens of times with the party buses, the gaudy vehicles blasting music as they crawled down the road, with thousands of ghouls shuffling after them. "What about the helicopter?" Aldrich asked. "Melvin's not available. He's down at the stadium doing cross-training with some pilots on the flight simulators. They're trying to get other people certified, so he's not the only one who can fly," Hansen said. "Which means we need a bus," Magnus said. Hansen nodded. "Except we're out. Every party bus we had has been ditched in the desert after a run," Parker said. The silence that followed was the uncomfortable kind, the kind that came when the only answer they knew wasn't available, and nobody had a replacement yet. Sullivan shifted his weight, looking at the ground. Parker leaned against the SUV, his arms folded. Magnus stood with his arms crossed, staring south toward the interstate as if he could see the horde from where they were standing. It was Aldrich who broke the silence. "What about the one near Pahrump?" Aldrich said. Everyone turned to him. "A couple weeks ago, one of the drivers had to abandon a bus on the outskirts of town when the engine died. We were going to go back for it, but things got busy," Aldrich said. "Do we know what was wrong with it?" Hansen asked. "The driver said the battery went dead. It was running fine before that, so if we can swap the battery out, it should start right up," Aldrich said. "Pahrump is an hour drive from here, and the town is going to be crawling with those things," Parker said. "What choice do we have?" Magnus asked. Parker didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. The bus was their only option, and the people in that car didn't have the luxury of waiting for a better plan. Every hour they sat out there was another hour the horde could press in tighter, another hour where something could go wrong with the car itself. A broken window, a door seal giving way, any of it could turn a rescue into a recovery. "Is there anywhere in Pahrump to get a battery?" Hansen asked. Before anyone could respond, a voice spoke up from behind them. "There's an automotive parts store at the north end of town." The group turned to find a man walking toward them from one of the caravan vehicles. He was in his mid-30s, solidly built, with grease-stained hands and the calloused fingers of someone who had spent his life working on engines. He had been sitting in one of the cars near the back of Janet's group and had been close enough to hear the conversation. "And you are?" Hansen asked. "Martin. I was a mechanic before all this, and I've driven a few of those party buses out of the city for you," Martin said. Hansen studied him for a moment. The man carried himself with a straightforward confidence that came from knowing his trade. "You know the store?" Hansen asked. "I used to deliver parts out there before everything went sideways. It's about a mile into town from the north side. Small place, but they had a good inventory. If the battery we need is anywhere, it's there," Martin said. "And you can get the bus running?" Hansen asked. "If it's just the battery, I can have it swapped in 5 minutes. If there's something else wrong with it, I'll figure it out. Engines are engines, and I've been working on them since I was old enough to hold a wrench," Martin said. Hansen looked at Magnus, who gave a single nod. Then he looked at Parker, who shrugged. "I didn't have any other plans today," Parker said. "Then we're going to Pahrump," Hansen said. The group moved quickly after that. Sullivan pulled Hansen aside for a moment, while the others got ready. "You want me to stay here and keep an eye on things?" Sullivan asked. "Yeah. Keep trying to reach Foster and get Janet's people settled somewhere safe. If anything changes with the horde on the interstate, I want to know about it," Hansen said. "You got it, Sarge," Sullivan said. "And get everybody back to the barricade line. If we can't pull those things in the other direction, we're going to have a fight on our hands." Sullivan nodded as Hansen walked over to the SUV that he and Parker had taken south. It was the largest vehicle they had available, with enough room for all 5 of them and whatever they might need to carry back. Parker was already loading extra magazines into a bag in the back seat, counting them as he went. Magnus and Aldrich had retrieved their weapons from their sedan, Magnus carrying his warhammer and shield, while Aldrich had his sword and the 2-piece spear that he assembled with a quick twist, the metal locking into place with a solid click. Martin climbed into the back seat with a toolbox he had pulled from one of the vehicles. The metal case was dented and scratched, but looked well stocked, the tools inside clanking together as he set it on the floor between his feet. He had also grabbed a tire iron from the trunk of one of Janet's cars, holding it across his lap as he settled in. "Everybody in?" Hansen asked. He got confirmations from the back, and Parker gave him a nod from the passenger seat. Hansen started the engine and pulled the SUV out onto the road, heading west. The drive to Pahrump took them through the northwest edge of the city and out into open desert. The road was a straight shot through flat terrain, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of nothing. The mountains sat low on the horizon ahead of them, their peaks hazy in the heat. Hansen kept the speed up, pushing the SUV as fast as the road would allow. The vehicle ate up the miles, the desert rolling by on both sides in a blur of brown and tan. Nobody spoke for the first stretch. The engine noise and the wind through the windows filled the silence, and each man sat with his own thoughts. The weight of what they were driving towards settled into the car without anyone needing to say it out loud. An unfamiliar town full of the dead. A parts store they had to reach. And a bus they had to get running before they could even begin to address the real problem sitting on the interstate behind them. Magnus sat behind Hansen, his warhammer resting against his leg, his shield propped up beside him. He stared out the window at the passing desert, his expression focused and calm. Aldrich sat beside him, his assembled spear angled across the seat, the tip resting against the door. Martin was in the middle, his toolbox at his feet, his hands resting on his knees. "So, how bad is Pahrump going to be?" Martin asked. "It depends on how many of those things have wandered back in from that party bus run," Hansen said. "The bus is on the south side of town. If the parts store is on the north end, we're going to have to cover the whole length of the place," Parker said. "Then we hit the store first, grab the battery, and push through to the bus," Magnus said. "And if the store is overrun?" Martin asked. "Then we make it not overrun," Aldrich said. Martin looked at the gladiator for a moment, trying to figure out if he was joking. Aldrich's expression made it clear he wasn't. "You get used to them," Parker said. Martin settled back into his seat, his eyes going to the road ahead. The open desert was giving way to the first signs of the outskirts, scattered buildings and fences appearing on both sides. A gas station sat dark and abandoned on the left, its pump standing in an empty lot. A small strip of shops followed on the right, their windows dark, their doors closed or hanging open. A faded sign advertising a diner hung crooked from its post, the wind pushing it back and forth with a faint creak. The town spread out before them as they pushed deeper in. The main road ran straight through the center, with side streets branching off into residential blocks on either side. It was the kind of place that would have been quiet on a normal day. Now it was quiet in a different way, the silence of a town where nobody was alive to make noise. And between the buildings, scattered across the road, and the lots and the sidewalks, the dead were waiting. Hansen slowed the SUV as the first few ghouls came into view, a handful of them stumbling along the shoulder of the road. Their heads turned as the vehicle approached, their bodies adjusting course to follow the noise of the engine. Behind them, deeper into town, Hansen could see more, a lot more. They filled the intersections and wandered between the buildings, clusters of them gathering in the shade of awnings and overhangs. The road ahead had at least 24 of them spread across it within the next block alone. "All right, we're here," Hansen said. He tightened his grip on the wheel and pressed the accelerator, pushing the SUV forward into the edge of Pahrump. The first zombie bounced off the front quarter panel with a dull thud, spinning away into the dirt. The second went under the wheels with a bump that rocked the vehicle. Magnus gripped his hammer tightly. "Let the battle begin." Chapter 4. Hansen pushed the SUV through the outskirts of Pahrump, keeping his speed up as ghouls staggered into the road ahead of them. The first few impacts were jarring, the creatures bouncing off the front end and spinning away into the dirt. But after a handful of them, the men inside stopped reacting. The SUV was heavy enough to take it, and stopping wasn't something any of them were interested in. Martin leaned forward between the front seats, pointing through the windshield. "There," Martin said. Hansen followed the direction and spotted the party bus, sitting off the road about 50 yards ahead. It was parked at an angle on a wide gravel lot, beside a closed-down bar. Its front end pointed toward the road, as if the driver had been preparing to pull out when the engine gave up. The gaudy paint job was faded from weeks in the desert sun, and a layer of dust covered the windows. Even from this distance they could see the creatures gathered around it, 24 of them pressing against the sides, drawn by the lingering scent of whatever had last been alive inside. "Pull up close. We need to clear them out before Martin can get a look at it," Parker said. Hansen nodded, swinging the SUV onto the gravel lot and accelerating toward the bus. The tires kicked up dust and loose rock as he closed the distance, and the ghouls around the bus began turning toward the noise. He brought the SUV to a hard stop 15 yards from the nearest cluster and killed the engine. "Let's go," Magnus said. The doors opened and the 5 of them spilled out. Magnus and Aldrich moved forward without hesitation, their shields up and weapons ready. The gladiators hit the first group of ghouls before the creatures had finished turning around. Magnus drove his hammer into the side of a skull, the impact sending the creature spinning to the ground. Aldrich thrust his spear through the eye socket of another, withdrawing it in a single smooth motion and stepping to the next target. Parker moved to the right flank, his rifle cracking twice as he put down 2 ghouls that were coming around the front of the bus. Hansen covered the left, dropping 3 more with controlled shots. The gunfire echoed across the lot and out into the surrounding streets, a sound that would draw attention from anything within earshot. Martin hung back near the SUV, his tire iron in hand, watching the perimeter while the others cleared the area. A single ghoul stumbled toward him from the side of the bar, its arms outstretched, its mouth hanging open. He stepped forward and cracked it across the temple with a swing that put it on the ground. He stood over it for a moment, making sure it was done, then looked back toward the bus. It wasn't his first kill since the world ended, but it wasn't something he had gotten used to either. The area around the vehicle was clear in under a minute. Bodies littered the gravel, dark fluid pooling beneath them in the dust. Magnus lowered his hammer and scanned the surrounding area while Aldrich kept watch toward the road. More creatures were coming, drawn by the gunfire, but they were still a few blocks away. "Martin, get in there and see what we've got," Hansen said. The mechanic jogged over to the bus and pulled the folding door open. He climbed inside, moving straight to the driver's seat. The keys were still in the ignition where the previous driver had left them. Martin turned them, and the bus made a weak clicking sound before going silent. He tried again with the same result. Nothing. Not even a struggling attempt to turn over. He climbed back out and moved to the engine compartment on the side of the bus, pulling the access panel open with a grunt. He leaned in, his hands moving over the components as he checked connections and wiring. After a few moments, he pulled back, wiping his hands on his pants. Battery is dead, drained dry, no charge left in it at all. But the engine looks solid, belts are good, no visible damage. A new battery and this thing will fire right up, Martin said. Then we need to get to that parts store, Hansen said. He looked toward the north end of town. The main road stretched ahead of them, lined with small businesses and storefronts. Between the buildings, ghouls wandered in loose groups. The numbers weren't as dense as what they had seen on the interstate, but there were enough of them to make the drive interesting. "How far?" Parker asked. "About a mile up the road. It's on the right side, sits in a small shopping strip," Martin said. "All right, let's get this done," Hansen said. They piled back into the SUV, the doors slamming shut in quick succession. Hansen started the engine and pulled back onto the road, heading north into the heart of Pahrump. The ghouls that had been drawn by the gunfire were filling in behind them, shuffling into the lot from the surrounding streets, but the SUV was already pulling away from them. The drive through town was rough. Hansen weaved between the creatures that filled the road, clipping some and pushing others aside with the bumper. The SUV rocked with each impact, the suspension working hard to keep them steady. Storefronts and houses rolled by on both sides, their windows dark, their interiors empty, or hiding things nobody wanted to think about. A pharmacy on the left had its front window smashed in, the shelves inside stripped bare. A diner on the right still had its open sign flickering in the window, powered by some backup system that hadn't given out yet. Parker kept his rifle pointed out the window, picking off the ghouls that got too close to the vehicle. Every shot drew more of them, heads turning all along the street, bodies changing course to follow the noise. In the back seat, Magnus watched the creatures through his window, with the detached focus of a man studying an opponent before a fight. "There, on the right," Martin said. A small strip of shops came into view, 5 or 6 storefronts sharing a long building with a common parking lot. The sign for the automotive parts store was still hanging above the second unit from the end, the lettering faded but legible. The lot had a handful of abandoned cars sitting in it, and scattered among them were 40 or 50 ghouls. Some were clustered near the storefronts, others milled about in the open spaces between the vehicles. "That's a lot of company," Parker said. "We don't need to clear the lot. We just need to get inside, grab the battery, and get back out," Hansen said. He drove the SUV straight into the lot, the engine roaring as he picked up speed. Ghouls scattered or went down as the vehicle plowed through the outer edge of the crowd, carving a path toward the front of the store. Hansen aimed for the space directly in front of the entrance and hit the brakes hard, the SUV skidding to a stop with the driver's side facing the door. "Magnus, Aldrich, clear a path. Parker, cover us. Martin, you're with me," Hansen said. The gladiators were out of the vehicle before he finished speaking. Magnus led with his shield, smashing it into the chest of the nearest ghoul and sending it flying backward. Aldrich was a step behind, his spear darting forward and finding a skull. The two of them moved toward the store entrance, dropping everything in their path with violent efficiency. No flair, no wasted movements, just quick and brutal strikes. Parker took up a position beside the SUV, his rifle up and firing. He picked off the ghouls approaching from the far end of the lot, the shots dropping them one after another in steady succession. The noise was drawing more from the surrounding blocks, their moaning building into a chorus that echoed off the storefronts. Hansen and Martin ran for the door. The glass was intact and the door was locked. Hansen stepped back and put the butt of his rifle through the glass, the pane shattering inward. He cleared the remaining shards from the frame and stepped through, Martin right behind him. The interior was dark and still, the shelves lined with automotive parts and supplies. The air inside was stale and warm, carrying the chemical smell of motor oil and rubber. Hansen swept the space with his rifle, checking the aisles for movement. A single ghoul stood at the far end of the store, its back to them, swaying in place between a rack of air filters and a display of windshield wipers. Hansen put a round through the back of its skull, and it dropped without a sound, collapsing against the shelf and sliding to the floor. "Find that battery," Hansen said. Martin was already moving. He knew the layout of these kinds of stores, and he navigated the aisles with purpose, scanning the shelves as he went. He passed the oil and fluids section, cut through the tool aisle, and turned the corner into the electrical section at the back. Rows of batteries sat on the bottom shelf, each one labeled by size and type. Martin ran his finger across the labels, reading them quickly, his lips moving as he matched specs in his head. "Got it," Martin said. He grabbed a battery that matched what the bus needed, the weight of it pulling his arm down as he lifted it from the shelf. He tucked it against his chest and headed back toward the front of the store. Outside, the situation was changing. Parker's rifle was cracking faster now, the shots coming in rapid pairs. Magnus and Aldrich had formed up near the entrance, their weapons rising and falling as the ghouls pressed in from every direction. The parking lot that had been manageable when they arrived was filling up, creatures pouring in from the side streets and the buildings on either side. Hansen reached the broken door and looked out. The SUV was still where they had left it, but the space around it was closing. Ghouls were pressing in from three sides, and the only clear path was the narrow gap the gladiators were holding between the door and the vehicle. "Parker, how bad is it?" Hansen called out. Parker fired twice more before answering, his voice carrying over the noise. "It's getting real crowded real fast, Sarge. We need to move," Parker said. Hansen looked back at Martin, who was coming up the aisle with the battery held tight against his chest. The mechanic's face was set, his eyes locked on the door. "Stay behind me," Hansen said. He turned back to the entrance and raised his rifle. Through the broken glass, he could see the street beyond the lot, filling with ghouls, dozens of them shuffling in from every direction, drawn by the noise and the commotion. The path to the SUV was narrowing by the second. Magnus drove his hammer into another skull, the crack of the impact cutting through the moaning. He glanced back at the door and saw Hansen and Martin standing there. "We need to leave, now," Magnus said. Aldrich thrust his spear through the face of a ghoul that was reaching for him, yanked it free, and nodded. "I second that," Aldrich said. Hansen looked at the shrinking gap, the creatures pressing in, the SUV sitting just 10 yards away, but feeling a lot further. Martin stood behind him, gripping the battery with white knuckles, the tire iron hanging from a loop on his belt. The chorus of moaning was growing louder, the sound coming from everywhere at once, building and layering as more and more of them closed in from the surrounding blocks. Through the broken storefront window, Hansen could see the road they had driven in on. It was gone now, swallowed by a mass of shuffling bodies that stretched from one side of the street to the other. Even if they got to the SUV, getting out of the lot was going to be a fight. They were surrounded, and the window was closing fast. Chapter 5. Hansen didn't wait for a better moment, because there wasn't going to be one. He raised his rifle and stepped through the broken doorframe, firing into the nearest cluster of ghouls. The first two dropped before the rest of them had time to react, and by then, Magnus was already past him, his shield leading the way. The gladiator hit the wall of creatures like a battering ram, his shield slamming into the chest of a ghoul and sending it stumbling backward into three more behind it. The impact created a gap just wide enough for Aldrich to slip through at his side, his spear driving forward in quick, precise thrusts. The two of them moved as a unit, Magnus absorbing the press of bodies against his shield, while Aldrich reached over and around it, putting down everything that got close. "Move! Stay behind them!" Hansen shouted back to Martin. Martin clutched the battery against his chest and ran. He stayed tight behind the gladiators, his eyes locked on the ground in front of him, to keep from tripping over the bodies that were piling up. A ghoul reached for him from the side, and he swung the tire iron without breaking stride, catching it across the jaw and sending it spinning away. Parker was at the SUV, his rifle barking in steady rhythm. He had climbed onto the hood and was firing from the elevated position, picking off the creatures that were closing in on the SUV. Each shot was deliberate, placed and effective, and the bodies were stacking up around the vehicle, but for everyone he dropped, 2 more shuffled in to take their place. "Get in the car!" Parker yelled. Magnus drove his hammer down onto the skull of a ghoul that had gotten past his shield, the creature folding to the ground at his feet. He kicked the body aside and pushed forward the last few yards to the SUV. Aldrich right beside him. Martin reached the back door and yanked it open, shoving the battery onto the seat before climbing in after it. Hansen was right behind him, sliding into the front passenger seat, while Magnus and Aldrich piled in from the other side. Parker dropped off the hood and into the driver's seat in one motion, the door slamming behind him. Hands were already slapping against the windows, gray fingers smearing across the glass, dead faces pressing close. Parker turned the key and the engine caught on the first try. He threw the SUV into drive and hit the gas. The vehicle lurched forward, the front end plowing into a cluster of ghouls that had massed in front of them. The impact shuddered through the frame, bodies tumbling over the hood and rolling off the sides. Parker kept the accelerator down, the SUV pushing through the crowd with brute force, the tires grinding over fallen creatures as it carved a path toward the lot exit. A ghoul landed on the hood, its fingers hooking onto the edge of the open sunroof. Aldrich reached up and drove the butt of his spear into its face, the creature's grip loosening as it slid off the side of the vehicle and disappeared under the wheels. Parker hit the road and turned south, the SUV fishtailing on the asphalt before the tires caught and straightened out. Ghouls filled the street behind them, a mass of shuffling bodies that had converged on the lot and were now following the noise of the engine. Ahead, the road was thinner but not empty, scattered creatures standing between them and the party bus a mile to the south. "Everybody still have all their fingers?" Parker asked. "Just drive," Hansen said. The mile back to the bus felt longer than the mile in. Parker pushed the SUV hard, weaving between the ghouls that stumbled into the road ahead of them. The creatures were spread out enough to navigate around, but the noise of the engine was pulling them in from every direction, the crowd thickening as they went. Martin sat in the back with the battery on the seat beside him, his toolbox between his feet. His hands were shaking from the adrenaline, but his breathing was steady, and he was already running through the steps in his head. Pop the access panel, disconnect the old battery, connect the new one, tighten the terminals. 5 minutes if he could work without interruption. Less if he pushed. The party bus came into view ahead of them, still sitting on the gravel lot where they had left it. The ghouls they had cleared earlier had been replaced by new ones, drawn by the sounds of the earlier fight. Hansen counted at least 30 of them spread around the bus and the lot, with more filtering in from the surrounding streets. "Same play as before. Clear the area around the bus and give Martin room to work," Hansen said. "I need the engine compartment on the right side. Keep them off me and I'll have it done as fast as I can," Martin said. Parker brought the SUV to a skidding stop on the gravel, the tires throwing up a wave of dust and small rocks. The doors flew open and the team spilled out for the second time, weapons ready. Magnus charged into the nearest group, his hammer swinging in a wide arc that connected with the side of a ghoul's head and sent it cartwheeling into 2 others. Aldrich moved to the opposite side of the bus, positioning himself near the engine compartment where Martin would be working. His spear flicked forward 3 times in quick succession, each thrust finding a skull, each withdrawal clean and fast. Hansen and Parker spread out on either side of the lot, their rifles cracking as they dropped the creatures at range before they could get close. The gunfire was loud and relentless, the sound bouncing off the buildings and rolling out across the town. Every shot was an invitation, and the dead were accepting. Martin ran to the bus and dropped to his knees beside the engine compartment. He pulled the access panel open with both hands, the metal groaning as it swung wide. The old battery sat inside, corroded and lifeless. He grabbed his wrench from the toolbox and went to work on the terminals, his fingers moving fast despite the shaking. The first terminal came free, and he pulled the cable aside. The second was tighter, the bolt rusted from exposure, and he had to put his weight into the wrench to break it loose. It gave with a sharp pop, and the cable came free. He grabbed the dead battery and hauled it out, the weight of it pulling at his arms as he set it on the ground beside him. A ghoul stumbled around the corner of the bus, reaching for him. Aldrich's spear punched through its temple before it got within arm's length, the creature dropping at Martin's feet. The mechanic didn't flinch. He grabbed the new battery and slid it into the compartment, lining up the terminals by feel. "How long?" Aldrich asked, yanking his spear free. 2 minutes, Martin said. 2 minutes was a long time when the dead were closing in from every direction. Hansen fired 3 more rounds, putting down a trio of ghouls that had emerged from between 2 houses across the street. His magazine ran dry, and he ejected it, slapping a fresh one into place without looking down. The creatures were coming faster now, the crowd around the lot growing as more of them wandered in from the deeper parts of town. Magnus was holding the front of the bus, his shield absorbing blow after blow as the ghouls pressed against him. His hammer rose and fell in steady rhythm, each swing ending a threat, but the press of bodies was pushing him backwards step by step. He dug his boots into the gravel and held his ground, his jaw clenched, his shield arm burning from the effort. "Martin!" Magnus called out. "Almost there!" Martin shouted back. He tightened the first terminal and grabbed for the second cable. His wrench slipped off the bolt on the first try, and he cursed under his breath, adjusting his grip and going again. The bolt turned, slow at first, then catching the threads and spinning tight. He gave it one final crank and dropped the wrench, slamming the access panel shut. He sprinted to the side of the bus, pulling the door open and throwing himself into the driver's seat. The keys were still in the ignition where he had left them. He grabbed them and turned. The engine groaned. It turned over once, coughing, straining against the cold start. Martin's stomach dropped. He turned the key again. The engine caught. It roared to life, the bus shaking as the motor fired on all cylinders, the exhaust coughing out a cloud of dark smoke that rolled across the gravel. Martin let out a breath that he felt like he had been holding since they first pulled into town. "It's running! Get in!" Martin yelled through the open door. Aldrich was first, leaping up the steps and moving past Martin into the bus. Magnus broke from the front line, backing up with his shield still raised, the ghouls stumbling after him. He reached the door and stepped up, turning sideways to fit his broad frame through the opening. "Hansen! Parker!" Magnus called. The 2 soldiers were falling back toward the vehicles, firing as they went. Parker peeled off toward the SUV, while Hansen ran for the bus. "Parker, take the SUV! Follow us out!" Hansen shouted. Parker gave a thumbs up and threw himself into the SUV, the engine still idling from when they had arrived. He slammed the door and dropped it into drive, pulling alongside the bus. Hansen jumped up the steps of the bus and grabbed the rail, pulling himself inside. Ghouls were reaching for the door behind him, gray hands clawing at the steps. Magnus stepped past Hansen and drove his boot into the face of the nearest one, sending it tumbling backward into the crowd. Hansen grabbed the folding door and pulled it shut, the rubber seals pressing together as the hands scraped against the outside. "Go!" Hansen said. Martin didn't need to be told twice. He put the bus in gear and hit the gas. The party bus lurched forward with a groan from the transmission, the heavy vehicle rolling off the gravel and onto the road. Ghouls bounced off the front bumper as he accelerated, the bus pushing through them with the kind of weight that a sedan couldn't match. Bodies went under the wheels, and the bus rocked but kept moving, picking up speed as it cleared the thickest part of the crowd. Parker followed close behind in the SUV, staying in the path the bus was clearing, running over the creatures that had been knocked down but not finished. The 2 vehicles moved south through Pahrump in a convoy, the bus leading the way, the SUV tucked in behind it. The town thinned around them as they pushed toward the outskirts. The buildings fell away, the ghouls thinned out, and the open desert appeared ahead of them. Martin kept the speed up, the bus rumbling down the road with a steady vibration that rattled the windows. The engine held. The battery held. Everything that needed to work was working. Hansen dropped into one of the passenger seats near the front, his rifle across his lap, his breathing heavy. Magnus sat across the aisle, his hammer resting on the floor between his feet, his shield arm hanging limp at his side. Aldrich was a few rows back, leaning against the window, his spear propped beside him. Nobody spoke for a while. The only sound was the engine, the road, and the wind pushing through a window near the back that had been lowered. The desert rolled by outside, flat, empty and free of anything that wanted to kill them. Hansen looked out the windshield at the road ahead. Pahrump was shrinking in the mirrors behind them, and the interstate was waiting ahead. They had the bus, they had the battery, and they had everybody accounted for. Now they just had to use it. "Nice work in there, Martin," Hansen said. Martin kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel now that the adrenaline was fading. Let's not do that again anytime soon. Chapter 6. The desert rolled by outside as the party bus and the SUV headed east from Pahrump, the two vehicles running in convoy along the same stretch of empty road they had taken on the way in. Martin was behind the wheel of the bus, his hands settled and steady, now that the worst of the adrenaline had burned off. Hansen sat in the seat behind him, studying the landscape through the windshield, while his mind worked through what came next. Parker was driving the SUV behind them, with Magnus in the passenger seat and Aldrich in the back. The radio sat in Hansen's hand, and he keyed it on. "Parker, you copy?" Hansen asked. "Right behind you," Parker said. "We need to talk about the approach. If we drive all the way back to Sullivan at the overpass and come at the horde from the north, we're adding an hour to this. Those people have been sitting in that car all day," Hansen said. "What are you thinking?" Parker asked. Hansen leaned forward and looked out the windshield at the road ahead. The highway back to the city ran northeast, but Interstate 11 ran north-south, and the horde was somewhere in the middle of it, a few miles south of town. If they cut south instead of heading back to the staging area, they could hit the interstate below the horde and come at it from the other direction. "We cut south and come in on the interstate below them. You and I will take the bus and drive it north into the horde with the music going. We draw a crowd and pull them south and away from the car. While we do that, the others use the SUV to rescue the others," Hansen said. There was a pause on the radio before Magnus's voice came through. Hansen must have had the speaker loud enough for the back seat to hear. "You're driving the bus into the horde?" Magnus asked. "The bus can take it. We've done this before. The music draws them, and we lead them south at a crawl. The ones around the car will pull off to follow the noise. And that's your window," Hansen said. "And after you've drawn them south?" Aldrich asked. "We'll figure that part out," Hansen said. "Understood," Magnus said, not wanting to push the issue. He knew the sergeant well enough to know that he could survive whatever the creatures threw at him. Martin glanced over his shoulder at Hansen. "Where am I going to be?" Martin asked. "You're in the SUV with Magnus and Aldrich. You're the one getting those people out of the car and into the vehicle. The gladiators handle the stragglers. You handle the survivors," Hansen said. Martin nodded. He had carried a 6-year-old to safety a few hours ago in his head, except that had been the automotive store, and the child had been a car battery. The real thing was going to be different, but the principle was the same. Get to them, grab them, move. "There's a junction a few miles ahead, where we can cut south and pick up the interstate," Martin said. "Take it," Hansen said. The bus swung south at the junction, the SUV following close behind. The road narrowed to 2 lanes, cutting through flat desert with nothing but dirt and scrub brush in every direction. They drove for another 20 minutes before the elevated stretch of Interstate 11 appeared ahead of them. Martin found an on-ramp and brought the bus up onto the highway, the wide lanes opening up in front of them. He pointed the bus north and slowed to a stop on the shoulder. Parker pulled the SUV in behind the bus. Hansen stepped off and walked back to them, and the 5 of them gathered between the 2 vehicles. The empty highway stretched north ahead of them. "From here, the horde should be a few miles up the road," Hansen said. He looked north but couldn't see them yet. The highway curved slightly in the distance, hiding whatever was beyond it. But they were out there. Thousands of them, pressing around a car with 5 people inside who had been waiting all day. "Parker, you're with me on the bus. Martin, you're driving the SUV. Magnus, Aldrich, you keep him alive while he gets those people out," Hansen said. Parker tossed the SUV keys to Martin, who caught them with one hand. The mechanic looked at the keys for a moment, then at the highway ahead, then nodded. "We'll be ready," Martin said. Magnus retrieved his hammer and shield from the bus, settling the shield on his arm before flexing the soreness out of his muscles. Aldrich assembled his spear, the 2 pieces locking together with a click that brought a smile to his face. "Don't wait for perfect," Hansen said. "It's not going to be perfect. You just need a gap." "We'll make it work," Magnus said. Hansen gave them a final nod and walked back to the bus with Parker. The 2 soldiers climbed aboard, Parker sliding into the driver's seat, while Hansen took the seat behind him. Parker flipped the switch for the external speakers and the system crackled to life. He selected a track and cranked the volume to full, The speakers mounted on the outside of the bus erupted with sound, the bass rattling the windows and blasting out across the open desert in every direction. Parker put the bus in gear and pulled onto the highway heading north. He kept the speed low, no more than 15 miles an hour, the music pouring from the bus as it crawled up the interstate. Behind them, the SUV sat on the shoulder, waiting. The first ghouls appeared within a minute, scattered creatures wandering along the edges of the road, their heads snapping toward the sound, their bodies redirecting to follow. They fell in behind the bus, shuffling after it with arms outstretched, drawn by the noise like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Parker watched them accumulate in the mirrors, the numbers growing as the bus pushed further north. Then the horde came into view. The highway ahead darkened as the mass of creatures filled the lanes from shoulder to shoulder, thousands of them, packed together, a river of gray flesh stretching north as far as Hansen could see. And somewhere in the middle of it, a white sedan with 5 people inside. "Here we go," Parker said. He kept the bus rolling, closing the distance to the southern edge of the horde. The creatures on the outer fringe turned toward the music first, their bodies pivoting, their direction changing. The movement rippled inward, spreading through the crowd as more and more of them heard the sound and adjusted course. They began flowing toward the bus, peeling away from the main body of the horde, a tide of the dead redirecting south. Parker slowed to a crawl as the leading edge reached them. The first ghouls pressed against the front of the bus, their hands slapping against the bumper and the grill, their faces blank and reaching. The bus pushed through them without stopping, the heavy vehicle shouldering them aside, the impacts thumping against the frame in a steady rhythm. Hansen moved to the back of the bus and looked out the rear window. The highway behind them was filling with creatures following the music, hundreds of them already shuffling south in the bus's wake. Ahead, through the windshield, the horde was splitting. The creatures nearest to the bus were flowing toward it, and the ones further back were following the movement of the ones in front of them. It was working. He could see the car now. The white sedan sat on the side of the highway, still surrounded, but the ring of bodies around it was loosening. Ghouls were pulling away, drawn by the music, leaving gaps in the crowd that hadn't been there minutes ago. The bus was close enough now that Hansen could see the windows of the car, could see the shapes of people inside, pressed against the glass, watching. "Keep it steady, we're pulling them off," Hansen said. Parker held the crawl, the bus driving past the car, going up 50 yards before crossing over the grassy median to the other side of the highway, turning towards the south. The music continued to pound from the speakers, the bass vibrating through the floor, the sound reaching every creature on the highway. More of them pulled away from the sedan, turning south, joining the growing river of dead following the bus. Hansen kept watch through the rear window as they passed the car and continued south. The ring around the vehicle was thinning fast, the creatures peeling off in groups of 5 and 10, stumbling after the bus. Within minutes, the dense wall of bodies had broken down into scattered clusters, 50 or 60 ghouls still milling around the car, but no longer packed shoulder to shoulder. He grabbed the radio. "Martin, the crowd around the car is breaking up. You've got clusters still around it, but there are gaps. Start moving north and be ready to go in," Hansen said. Martin's voice came back steady. "Copy that. We're moving," Martin said. In the SUV a mile south, Martin pulled onto the highway and accelerated north. Magnus sat in the passenger seat with his hammer across his lap, his shield wedged between his knees. Aldrich was in the back, his spear braced against the door, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The scattered ghouls that were following the bus ignored the SUV as it passed them, their attention fixed on the wall of sound moving south. Martin weaved around the stragglers, the SUV cutting between them at speed. The car came into view ahead, the white sedan sitting at the side of the road, with loose groups of creatures still gathered around it. "Take us in fast. Don't stop until we're beside the car," Magnus said. Martin pressed the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, closing the distance in seconds. He aimed for the widest gap in the ring and hit it at speed, the front end smashing through a cluster of ghouls that went spinning aside. The SUV skidded to a stop beside the sedan, just enough room between the vehicles for the doors to open. Magnus was out before the vehicle had fully stopped. His hammer caught the nearest ghoul across the chest, launching it backward. Aldrich came out the other side, his spear finding two skulls in rapid succession. The gladiators moved in opposite directions around the car, clearing the creatures closest to the vehicle with fast, brutal strikes. They had done this enough times that the rhythm was second nature, each man covering his angle, each swing and thrust finding its mark. Martin jumped out and ran to the sedan. He could see faces through the glass, a woman in the front seat, a man beside her, and 3 children in the back. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale and streaked with dried tears. He grabbed the door handle and pulled. It was locked. He knocked on the window with his fist. "Open the door! We're here to get you out!" Martin yelled. The woman fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking badly enough that she missed the button on the first try. The click came on the second attempt. Martin yanked the door open and reached inside. "Come on, we need to go now. Get into the SUV," Martin said. The man in the passenger seat was already moving, turning to help the kids out of the back. The children were crying, clinging to each other, their small bodies trembling. Martin took the first child, a girl no older than 6, and carried her to the SUV, setting her in the back seat. He went back for the second, a boy around 8 or 9, who grabbed onto Martin's neck and wouldn't let go. Martin carried him with one arm and guided the third child, a girl in her early teens, with the other. She climbed into the SUV on legs that were stiff from being folded into the back seat for hours. The woman stumbled out of the driver's seat and the man came around from the other side, both of them moving on legs that had been cramped for too long. Martin guided them to the SUV, pushing them in after the children. Magnus and Aldrich were still holding the perimeter, but the fight was thinning. Most of the ghouls in the area had followed the bus south, and the ones that remained were scattered and disorganized. Magnus put his hammer through the skull of one more and scanned the area. The nearest creatures were 20 yards away, stumbling toward them, but not close enough to be a threat. "They're in! Let's go!" Martin shouted. Aldrich pulled back first, sliding into the SUV through the open rear door, fitting himself in beside the teenage girl, who pressed against the far window to make room. Magnus backed toward the passenger door, his shield still raised, and threw himself inside. He pulled the door shut as gray hands appeared around the far side of the car, too slow and too late. Martin was already behind the wheel. He dropped the SUV into drive and floored it, the tires screaming on the asphalt as the vehicle shot forward. He pointed it north, toward the city. Away from the bus and the horde, it was leading south. Ghouls reached for the vehicle as it blew past them, their fingers scraping against the paint before falling away. The SUV raced up the interstate, the stranded sedan shrinking in the mirror behind them. Inside, the rescued family clung to each other, the children sobbing quietly, the adults staring ahead with the hollow expressions of people who couldn't yet believe it was over. Magnus turned in his seat to look back at the family. The boy was still clinging to the teenage girl, his face buried against her shoulder. The man sat rigid, his hands gripping his knees, his breathing shallow and fast. "You're safe now," Magnus said. The man looked at him, at the armor and the hammer and the shield, and for a moment his expression was one of pure confusion. Then something in his face broke, and he nodded, his eyes filling. "Thank you," the man said. Magnus held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to face the road ahead. Martin kept his foot on the gas, the overpass growing larger in the windshield. Behind them, far to the south, the faint thump of bass was still audible, the party bus doing its job, leading thousands of the dead away from the city, one slow mile at a time. Martin gripped the wheel and kept driving. They had the family, all 5, alive and breathing. Now they just had to hope Hansen and Parker could say the same. Chapter 7. The party bus crawled south along Interstate 11, with several thousand ghouls shuffling behind it. The music was still blasting from the external speakers, the bass thumping through the frame of the vehicle in a steady pulse that Parker could feel in his teeth. He kept the speed at a crawl, just fast enough to stay ahead of the leading edge of the horde, close enough that the creatures never lost interest. Hansen sat in the back of the bus, watching the horde through the rear window. The sight of it was something that didn't get easier to look at no matter how many times he saw it. A river of the dead filling the highway from one side to the other, stretching back further than he could see, all of them moving in the same direction, drawn by the sound like moths to a light that would never go out. "How far do you want to take them?" Parker called back from the driver's seat. Hansen thought about it. They needed to pull the horde far enough south that it wouldn't drift back to the city before the barricade was finished. The creatures moved slow, but they moved constantly, and without something to hold their attention, they would eventually wander back north. Every mile they put between the horde and the city was another day of breathing room. Another couple miles at least. I want them far enough out that they won't be a problem for a while, Hansen said. Parker nodded and kept the bus rolling. The highway stretched ahead of them, empty and open, the desert spreading out flat on both sides. There was nothing out here but road and dirt and sky. The abandoned vehicles that had littered the highway closer to the city were sparse now, just the occasional car sitting on the shoulder, left behind by someone who had run out of gas or luck, or both. They drove for another 15 minutes, the bus moving at walking pace, the horde following with the patient persistence that made them so dangerous. Individual creatures were slow and clumsy and easy to deal with. Thousands of them moving together was something else entirely. There was a mass to it, a pull that drew everything toward it and didn't let go. Hansen checked the fuel gauge from where he sat and could see the needle hovering just above empty. They had been running on fumes for the last mile, and the bus wasn't going to carry them much further. "We're almost out of gas," Parker said, confirming what Hansen had already seen. "Good. That's our exit," Hansen said. He moved to the front of the bus and stood beside Parker, looking through the windshield. The road ahead was clear for as far as he could see. Behind them, the horde filled the highway, thousands strong, still following, still reaching. "Here's what we do. You floor it. Put as much distance between us and them as you can before the tank runs dry. When it dies, we get out and run. Head north, stay off the highway, use the desert," Hansen said. "That's a long walk back," Parker said. "You got somewhere else to be?" Hansen asked. Parker let out a short laugh and shook his head. "Not particularly," Parker said. "Then let's move," Hansen said. Parker killed the music. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the sound had been, the absence of it rushing in like a wave. For a moment, the only thing they could hear was the engine idling and the distant chorus of moaning from the horde behind them. Then Parker hit the gas. The bus lurched forward, the engine straining as it pushed past the crawl and into something faster. The speedometer climbed 20, 30, 40 miles an hour, the bus swaying on its suspension as it picked up speed on the open highway. The horde shrank in the mirrors, the leading edge of it falling behind as the distance grew. Within seconds, they had put 100 yards between themselves and the front of the crowd. Within a minute, the gap was a quarter mile and growing. The engine coughed at the 50-mile-an-hour mark. Parker felt it in the steering, the bus shuddering as the fuel line drew air instead of gas. He kept his foot down, squeezing every last yard out of the tank. The bus coughed again, harder this time, the engine stuttering before catching one more time. Then it died. The bus rolled forward on momentum alone, the speed dropping as friction and the weight of the vehicle took over. Parker guided it to the right shoulder and let it coast to a stop, the big vehicle settling onto the asphalt with a final creak of the suspension. "End of the line," Parker said. Both men grabbed their rifles and moved to the door. Hansen pulled it open and stepped down onto the highway, the heat of the asphalt pushing up through the soles of his boots. Parker followed, pulling the door shut behind him out of habit more than necessity. They stood beside the bus for a moment, looking south. The horde was still coming. It was distant now, a dark mass filling the highway half a mile back. But it was moving. It would reach the bus eventually, and when it did, the two soldiers needed to be long gone. "North, off the road. Let's go," Hansen said. They stepped off the highway and onto the desert floor, their boots crunching on the dry, cracked earth. The ground was flat and open, dotted with low scrub brush and the occasional cluster of rocks. There was no cover and no shade, just miles of baked landscape stretching out toward the distant outline of the city on the horizon. They moved at a jog, settling into a pace that they could maintain for a while without burning out. The heat pressed down on them, the sun sitting low, but still putting out enough to make the air shimmer above the ground. Sweat started forming within the first few minutes, soaking into their shirts and running down their faces. Neither of them complained. Complaining took energy, and energy was something they were going to need. They ran in silence for the first mile, their breathing falling into a steady rhythm. The highway sat off to their right, a gray line cutting through the brown landscape. On it, far behind them, The horde continued its slow march south, following the road the bus had been on, their direction set by the last sound they had followed. As long as Hansen and Parker stayed quiet and stayed off the road, the creatures wouldn't have any reason to change course. It was the second mile that got complicated. Parker spotted them first. A group of ghouls wandering through the desert ahead of them, spread out in a loose cluster that covered a wide swath of ground. There were at least 20 of them, scattered between the scrub brush and the rocks, their shapes visible against the pale dirt. They weren't part of the main horde. These were strays, creatures that had wandered off the highway at some point and drifted into the open desert. "We've got company," Parker said, keeping his voice low. Hansen slowed to a walk, his eyes scanning the group ahead. The creatures hadn't noticed them yet. They were spread out enough that there were gaps between them, spaces where two men could slip through if they were careful and quiet. "We go around, wide left, keep it quiet," Hansen said. They adjusted their course, swinging left and giving the group a wide berth. Their boots scraped softly on the dirt, each step placed with care. The ghouls continued their aimless wandering, none of them turning toward the two soldiers. They made it past the first cluster without incident, but the second group was closer together and directly in their path, a dozen of them milling around a dried-up wash that cut across the desert floor. There was no way around them without adding another half-mile to the trek, and the sun was dropping lower. Hansen held up a fist, and Parker stopped beside him. They crouched behind a low outcropping of rock, studying the group. The creatures were bunched together in the wash, their feet dragging through the sandy bottom, their movements slow and directionless. "We can't go around this one without losing too much time," Hansen said. "Quiet or loud?" Parker asked. Hansen looked at the group, then looked behind them. The main horde on the highway was still a couple miles back, but sound carried far out here. Gunfire would reach them, and it would reach any other strays between here and the city. "Quiet, knives. We take the ones on the edges first and work inward," Hansen said. Parker slung his rifle over his back and pulled his knife from his belt. Hansen did the same. They moved forward in a low crouch, approaching the wash from the eastern side, where the bank was highest. The first ghoul was standing alone at the edge of the wash, its back to them, swaying in place. Hansen came up behind it and drove his knife into the base of its skull, his free hand catching the body and lowering it to the ground. No sound. No reaction from the others. Parker moved to the next one, 5 yards further along the bank. He grabbed it by the back of the head and pulled it backward, the blade punching through the temple. The creature went limp, and he eased it down, the body settling into the dirt without a noise. They worked their way along the edge of the wash, taking the ghouls down one at a time, each kill clean and silent. The creatures in the center of the group never noticed. They just kept shuffling through the sand, their vacant eyes staring at nothing, their feet dragging through the wash in endless, pointless circles. By the time Hansen and Parker reached the center of the group, 8 of them were down. The remaining 4 were clustered together in a tight knot, too close to take individually without alerting the others. Hansen caught Parker's eye and held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. They moved together, each man stepping forward and driving a blade into a skull. 2 dropped. The third turned toward the commotion, its mouth opening in a low moan, but Parker was already there, his knife punching through its eye socket before the sound could build. The fourth reached for Hansen, gray fingers closing around his sleeve, but he twisted free and brought the blade down through the top of its skull. It dropped at his feet, the fingers going slack. Hansen stood in the wash, breathing hard, his knife dripping. Parker stood beside him, wiping his blade on his pants. The wash was quiet. The desert was quiet. Nothing moved except the heat shimmer rising off the ground. "Not bad for a couple of guys who were only supposed to be moving cars today," Parker said. Hansen didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Let's keep moving," Hansen said. They cleaned their knives and sheathed them, pulling their rifles back to the ready position. The city was visible on the horizon ahead of them, the outlines of buildings and rooftops rising above the flat desert. It was still a few miles out, but it was there, and there was nothing between them and it but open ground. They picked up the jog again, their legs heavy and their lungs working harder in the dry heat. The adrenaline from the wash was fading, replaced by the deep, settled fatigue that came from a day that had started with pushing cars onto a barricade and had somehow ended with a rescue mission, a trip to Pahrump, and a hike through zombie-infested desert. The last mile was the hardest. Their pace had slowed to something closer to a fast walk, their boots dragging, their shirts soaked through, but the city kept getting closer, the buildings growing taller, the details sharpening. They could make out the barricade on the northern edge, the line of cars glinting in the low sunlight, and beyond it, the streets and houses they had driven through that morning. Parker was the first to spot the gap in the barricade where they could pass through, a section that hadn't been filled in yet, an opening between two cars wide enough for both of them to walk through side by side. "Home, sweet home," Parker said. They walked through the gap and stepped onto the other side of the line, their boots hitting pavement that felt different from the desert floor, safer somehow, even though it was just asphalt. The neighborhood beyond the barricade was quiet, the houses sitting undisturbed, the streets empty. Hansen stopped walking. His legs made the decision for him, his knees buckling just enough that he sat down on the bumper of one of the barricade cars. Parker made it 3 more steps before doing the same thing, dropping onto the ground beside him and leaning back against a tire. Neither of them spoke. They just sat there, breathing, letting the exhaustion wash over them. The sun was touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the kind of sunset that would have been beautiful if either of them had the energy to appreciate it. Chapter 8. Hansen didn't know how long they had been sitting there. It could have been 5 minutes or it could have been 30. The sun had slipped below the horizon and the sky was fading from orange to purple, the last light of the day draining out of the desert like water through a crack. His legs had stopped aching and had moved into the numb phase, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. Parker was still on the ground beside him, his back against the tire of one of the barricade cars, his rifle resting across his thighs. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. His breathing was too uneven for that, his chest rising in the shallow rhythm of a man who was awake and aware, but had simply decided not to move for a while. His hands were resting at his sides, palms up, the fingers curled loosely. The neighborhood behind them was quiet. The houses sat dark and still, the streetlights dead, the only illumination coming from the fading sky overhead. Somewhere a few blocks away, a dog was barking, the sound sharp and insistent before trailing off into silence. It was the kind of sound that would have been unremarkable a couple months ago, background noise that nobody would have noticed. Now, it was a reminder that not everything in the city was dead. Hansen's radio crackled. He looked down at it, clipped to his belt, the small speaker emitting a burst of static before a voice came through. He didn't reach for it right away. His arms felt like they were filled with sand, heavy and resistant, and the idea of lifting one of them to grab the radio seemed like an unreasonable request. The voice came through again. "Sergeant Hansen, this is Sullivan. Do you copy?" Sullivan asked. Hansen let out a breath through his nose and reached for the radio. His fingers fumbled with the clip before he managed to pull it free, bringing it up to his mouth. "Yeah, Sullivan, I'm here," Hansen said. "Sarge, are you two safe?" Sullivan said. "Yeah, Sullivan, we're fine. Just exhausted. Been hiking for a while," Hansen said. "Hiking? What happened to the bus?" Sullivan asked. "Ran out of gas about 5 miles south. We left it there with a few thousand new friends and hoofed it back," Hansen said. There was a pause on the other end. Hansen could hear Sullivan processing that, the silence carrying the weight of what the corporal was choosing not to say. "Copy that. Well, I've got some news that's going to make you real happy," Sullivan said. "Unless you're about to tell me there's a cold beer waiting for me somewhere. I doubt it," Hansen said. "Better. Melvin just got back to Nellis. He finished up at the stadium and he's fueled and ready to fly. He wants to know if you need a pickup," Sullivan said. Hansen stared at the radio in his hand. He blinked once, then twice. Then he started laughing. It wasn't a chuckle or a polite laugh. It was the deep, full-body kind that came from somewhere in the gut, the kind that hurt the ribs and made the eyes water. He leaned forward on the bumper of the car, his shoulders shaking, the radio dangling from his hand as the laughter rolled out of him. Parker opened his eyes and looked over, confused at first, then curious. "What?" Parker asked. Hansen couldn't answer. He was still laughing, his face red, his breath coming in short gasps between fits. He held the radio out toward Parker, pressing the talk button with his thumb. "Sullivan, say that again," Hansen managed. Melvin is back at Nellis and can fly for pickup. You want me to send him your way? Sullivan asked. Parker stared at the radio. Then he looked at Hansen. Then he looked down at his legs, stretched out on the ground in front of him, the boots caked in dust and desert grime, the muscles underneath them screaming from the miles they had just covered on foot. Then he started laughing too. The two of them sat there on the barricade, laughing like idiots in the fading light, the sound of it carrying out across the empty neighborhood. Hansen finally composed himself enough to key the radio. Tell Melvin thanks, but we're good. He's a few hours too late, Hansen said. You sure? He says he can be there in 10, Sullivan said. We're sure. We're already at the barricade on the north side. But tell him we appreciate the offer. And Sullivan, the rescue team. Everybody make it back all right? Hansen asked. Everybody's back safe. Magnus, Aldrich, and Martin brought the family in about 40 minutes ago. The kids were pretty rattled, but they're being looked after, Sullivan said. Good. That's good, Hansen said. He let the radio drop to his lap. Parker shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Of course he's available now, Parker said. That's how it works. You need a helicopter, there's no helicopter. You walk 5 miles through the desert, now there's a helicopter, Hansen said. The universe has a sick sense of humor, Parker said. And a lousy one at that, Hansen said. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence, the two of them sitting side by side as the sky continued to darken above them. Stars were beginning to show through the purple, faint at first, then brighter as the last of the daylight gave way. The air was cooling, the heat of the day releasing its grip, and for the first time in hours, something felt close to peaceful. Hansen's radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different. Hansen, you there? Foster asked. Hansen straightened up on the bumper, the captain's voice cutting through the fatigue in a way that Sullivan's hadn't. I'm here, Captain, Hansen said. Sullivan filled me in on what happened today. Good work out there. All 5 survivors are safe and accounted for. Janet's people are settling in at one of the strongholds near the base, Foster said. That's good to hear. How's the family from the car? Hansen asked. Shaken up but fine. The kids are already eating and the adults are resting. Magnus and the crew made sure they were taken care of, Foster said. Hansen nodded to himself. The image of that small hand pressed against the car window came back to him. And for the first time since he had seen it, the knot it had put in his chest loosened. I also wanted to give you an update on the barricade, Foster said. Go ahead, Hansen said. While you were out playing hero, the rest of us were busy. The first full ring of cars is now in place around the city. Every road, every gap, every access point. The line is closed, Foster said. Hansen looked over to Parker, whose eyebrows went up. The whole city? Hansen asked. The whole city. Jade's crew on the north side finished up about an hour ago, and the last section on the south end got buttoned up right before sunset. It's rough, and there are sections that need a lot of work, but the line is continuous. Nothing is getting in without climbing over a car, Foster said. Hansen let that sink in, a line of cars circling the entire city. Weeks of work by hundreds of people, pushing vehicles into place block by block, street by street, closing off every road and gap that led into the open desert. It was the kind of project that would have seemed impossible on day 0, and now it was done. That's the best news I've heard all day, Hansen said. The second best news is that tomorrow all we have to do is reinforce it. The welders are ready to go with the rebar and brackets, and Jade has her teams lined up to start on the wall sections. We're looking at a few months of hard work, but the foundation is there, Foster said. Parker leaned his head back against the tire and closed his eyes again, a slow smile spreading across his face. A wall around the city, a real, physical barrier between them and everything outside. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to solve every problem they had, but it was something solid, something they could build on. What do you need from us tomorrow? Hansen asked. I need you and Parker to get some rest tonight and report to Jade in the morning. She's running the reinforcement effort on the north side, and she specifically requested the two of you, Foster said. She requested us? Parker asked loud enough for the radio to pick up. Her exact words were that she had a couple of soldiers who owed her a day of pushing cars around. I'm assuming she meant you two, Foster said. Hansen let out a tired laugh. Yeah, that sounds about right, Hansen said. Get some sleep, both of you. That's an order, Foster said. "Copy that, Captain," Hansen said. The radio went quiet, and Hansen clipped it back onto his belt. He sat on the bumper for another moment, looking out at the barricade stretching away in both directions. The line of cars disappeared into the darkness on either side, an unbroken chain of metal separating the city from the desert beyond. It wasn't a wall yet, but it was going to be. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs protesting the decision. Every muscle from his hips to his ankles made its objection known, the kind of soreness that was going to be worse in the morning. He extended a hand down to Parker. Parker looked at the hand, then looked up at Hansen. "If I get up, I'm going to have to walk somewhere," Parker said. "That's generally how it works," Hansen said. "I've done enough walking today to last me a while," Parker said. "You can sleep right here on the ground if you want. But Jade's going to find you in the morning, and I don't think that's how you want to start your day with her," Hansen said. Parker considered that for a moment, then grabbed Hansen's hand and pulled himself up with a groan. He stood there swaying for a second, finding his balance, then bent down to pick up his rifle. "Where are we sleeping?" Parker asked. "There's a whole neighborhood right in front of us. Surely one of these houses has a guest room for you," Hansen said, as he gestured towards the rows of houses. "How did I get stuck with the guest room?" Parker asked with a chuckle. "Sometimes there's a benefit to being higher ranked," Hansen said with a smirk. The two soldiers walked away from the barricade, their boots scuffing on the pavement, their rifles slung over their shoulders. They moved slowly, two tired men at the end of a very long day, their shadows stretching out behind them in the faint light of the stars overhead. Behind them, the barricade sat quiet and solid in the darkness, a ring of steel surrounding the city they were building inside it. Tomorrow, there would be welders and rebar and vinyl siding. Tomorrow, there would be walls. But tonight there was just the line, and the silence, and the knowledge that, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, the city had a border, the end.